Well, hello again and welcome once more to the Invisible College, where we're going to continue with my latest series, which is called The Forgotten History of Britain. And I think this is episode 4 or 5. I'm not sure, to be honest. I think it's actually episode 4. Anyway, this one's called The Secrets of Troy, and we're going to be looking into the whole connection between Britain and ancient Troy. This is actually going to be in two sections, this present lecture. I'm going to do a section today about the Trojan War in particular, and then we'll have the consequences for a migration to Britain that our own British histories, the Welsh ones, tell us that actually happened. Now, you may not believe that, I don't know, but we're going to look into the evidence and we're going to address this whole subject, which cuts into many different areas, actually. It cuts into cultural areas, and it cuts into the whole question about how do we work out what happened when in history. Because often, we get stories, Trojan War is a good example, that don't come with an index that tells you all the history, the dates. It's not sort of recorded, it's a legend, it's a tradition. And we're going to be having to work out for ourselves when we might think this really did happen. Because we have a problem, you see, with the dating in ancient history. It's all to do with how do you measure when dates happened. This happens a lot actually in science. It happens in other areas too. This is a way of measuring things with a ruler. You don't know that ruler even exists. We have the same kind of problem with ancient history when we try to use things like carbon dating. Well, do we know that the carbon dates are true when we go back so many years? Are they true for the first 1,000, but a bit iffy after that? Or 10,000, bit iffy after that? Can we use ice core measurements to date things going way back? Well, we're making assumptions that it's been reasonably stable and been building up at a steady state. But was it? Might have been melting a bit and growing a bit more. And, there are these variables that throw things into doubt. And when we're looking at something like the history of the Trojan War, what we rely on a lot are things like measurements of or the identification of particular crockery, pots and pans and things like that, and comparing styles of pots with other styles of pots from other places that we think we know the date line of. And I'll come to more on that now, but it's a bit like trying to measure things when you've got a ruler and you're not sure that it's measuring in centimetres. It might be inches it's measuring in. But you've never seen an inch, you don't know what an inch looks like, you don't know what a centimetre looks like. You have a ruler and you say, well, this must be the right ruler, I'll go and use that to measure. And your measurements could be totally out because you're using the wrong kind of ruler for what you thought you were measuring centimetres, but you're actually measuring with a ruler it's marked out in inches. And that's kind of the sort of thing that happens with dating ancient history. So I don't take what they say in history books about dates too literally. I'm very sceptical about a lot of dates, and I'm not alone in that actually. That people tend to put the dates in that they want for whatever reasons. You might say I do the same, but at least I try to base things on other things as well as measuring the date. I try to find out correlations of culture of traditions and things like that. You'll see this as we go along. Anyway, this one's called The Secrets of Troy. Now I'm going to read things off the screen, so excuse me if at times I'm looking down below, because I'm actually reading off the screen because I want to get things right. Now it may seem surprising that the Brute Tasilio, which we discussed in the last episode, begins with the story of the Trojan War. Brute Tasilio begins with a writing called Dares Frigius, which is a kind of outline of the Trojan War. This is a separate book, a separate document that's been inserted. And it's because it's apt. You need to know about the Trojan War to understand what's going to happen subsequently to that. This war was a collision between the expanding Greek world, they built cities on the coast of Anatolia, and the world of oriental powers such as Lydia, Phrygia and Troy. We'll be meeting them as we progress. The last was the kingdom which controlled access to the Black Sea, the Dardanelles. Now you can see that here. The Dardanelles, we have the Troad down here, the Troad, and Troy was on the coast there. And you've got the Dardanelles Straits here leading to the Sea of Marmara. And beyond that, you've got another narrowing at Constantinople before you get to the Black Sea. Now, that was a very important trading route for anything that was coming up. There's some big rivers that come into the Black Sea. And people used to bring stuff down them. Like amber, for instance, but also other things being traded along through the Black Sea and into the Mediterranean. So having access to be able to control that strait at the Dardanelles was very important, and that's one reason why Troy was founded. Actually, there was actually a city called Dardania, which is Dardanelles gets its name from, which is right on the top of the Troad, which was this triangular area in particular here. And the Dardanelles, the Dardania, could control that narrowing there. So the Trojan War is really a lot to do with access to the Black Sea. That's what it's all about. But also, the Greeks were busy establishing cities along this coast of what they called Ionia, and again we'll be seeing more about that. So they're coming into collision with the sort of more inland powers, such as Lydia, which was pushed back from the coast incidentally, and Caria and Lycia, as well as the Troy up here. So there's a conflict going on between the Greeks and the people of Anatolia. And that's actually has gone on right through history. Now then, early Welsh history begins with a legendary migration of Trojans to Britain. Their leader was a great-grandson of Aeneas, and this grandson's variously called Brute, or Brutus, or sometimes Prydain, from which we get Britain, Prydain. He's sometimes called that. And he becomes the first king of a dynasty of kings that preceded the Romans in Britain by hundreds of years, at least hundreds of years. You have these British kings, and the Welsh texts are full of references back to these earlier kings. Who they know, and the Annals go back to them, and the genealogies, many of them trace back to these Brutus kings, this Trojan lineage of the original, as they would see it, original. Maybe there was things going on before that, but they trace back to this Trojan lineage from which they came, or so they believe. So Brutus becomes the first king of a dynasty of kings that preceded the Romans in Britain by hundreds of years. Kings such as Casiwalanus, he fought against Julius Caesar, And Cunobelinus, he was around at the time, actually he was around at the time of Augustus. Caractacus, who fought against the Romans at the time of Claudius. And so there's other kings, Lud and so on. You heard of Ludgate Circus, that's named after King Lud. So we have this dynasty of kings, this legendary dynasty, which has been sort of pushed backwards into a mythology by modern scholars. They don't want to hear about them, but they are still recorded in the Welsh texts. This Brutus legend is therefore a sequel to the legendary foundation of Rome by Aeneas the Trojan, which in turn is a sequel to the events recorded in the Greek legends concerning the Trojan War. So we're going to be talking a bit about Aeneas. He's a Trojan that survived, or he's not actually even from Troy itself, the city of Troy. He's from somewhere else, but he's related to them, and he survives and he goes to Italy. But we'll be coming to that. And the Brutus who comes to England is his great-grandson. Now, faced with these legends within legends, we can take one of three attitudes. We can, like Bishop Stubbs, and you can see him there, who was Regius Professor of Modern History at Oxford between 1866 to 84, we can bin it as worthless fiction. And that's basically what he did. He ordered the libraries to get rid of all this old Welsh stuff, these old Welsh books and translations of it, get rid of all that nonsense about Trojans, all that stupid history about Brutus. We're starting again, and we're going to do it on the German model. I'm not quite sure what he meant by the German model, but that's the terminology he used. I think he's talking about the Anglo-Saxons. We're going to start with them. But he obviously knew about the Romans. So the Roman Empire becomes the bedrock of British history. The invasion, first of all, of Julius Caesar and then Claudius. History starts. Well, of course, it didn't start then. I mean, Britain was around long before that. We only have to look at Stonehenge and places like that to see that there was a lot going on here. And we know from Greek texts and Roman texts that people were trading with the British Isles from the Mediterranean long before the Roman conquests. During the Bronze Age, they were coming here to collect tin and copper, and even maybe some gold. There was gold mined here as well. And bringing that back by ship to the Mediterranean world, particularly the tin was needed for making bronze. You mix it with copper and you can make bronze, and tin was in short supply. So this is where they came to, the Kazitories they call it, and particularly Cornwall. So binning this history is not doing us any favours, it's running away from the problem. So alternatively, we can naively accept the story of Brutus at face value, complete with giants, dragons and medieval chivalry codes. Now, if you read Geoffrey of Monmouth, we've been talking a lot about him in the last episode, and the one before that I think we mentioned him, as translating the Bruticilio, or this ancient Welsh book that would come back. And he talks about how when the Britons arrived, Brutus and his friends, they found giants living in Britain, and they sort of fought against the giants. And he had a hero friend called Corineus, or Corin, who liked to wrestle with the giants, and particularly one called Gog-Magog. And he wrestles with Gog-Magog and throws him over the cliff. Probably, I think, at Dartmouth, but in the written traditions, it's supposed to be in Plymouth, in the Hoe in Plymouth, and that's not all that high up from the sea. I think it was probably Dartmouth, because they supposedly landed first at Totnes, and that's just up the river from Dartmouth. But I might be wrong on that, but that doesn't matter anyway. Were they really fighting giants? Maybe the guys who were already living here were a bit bigger, but I doubt they were what you would call giants. Not in that sense. But on the other hand, people had seen the stone monuments, how did they put that up? Oh, there must have been giants that built these things. So, there must have been giants here before the coming of Brutus. That makes sense to me. So I think we have to take the third option, and I'm going to say here, or we can treat it as pay dirt. That's the third option, that needs to be sifted, washed and refined in order to separate the gold of history from the overburden of fantasy. And that's my approach. So I don't read Geoffrey of Monmouth or anything else and say, well, that's, he's written it, he's the man, he's got it right, that's it. There's going to be dragons, there's going to be giants, there's going to be all this going on. Well, I think that very often these ancient histories and mythologies, they do contain the truth, but it's like gold contained in overburden. I love watching Gold Rush, which is a program they have on Discovery Channel, where they have to dig up all the gold, all the dirt up in the Klondike, and then they have to put it through a wash plant, and the wash plant washes it, and the gold will settle down to the bottom and get caught in mats, and then the dirt and the rocks and everything is thrown out, and that goes off the edge with the water, and then they can take the mats and they can get the gold out of the mats, and they end up with the gold. They separate tons and tons, thousands of tons of dirt to get one jar of gold. Might contain, 100 ounces of gold if they're lucky. So they have to refine it. And I think that's what we have to do with this mythology that's come down to us. We don't take it totally on face value, but we work with it and we sift it. We don't bin it, we don't throw it away, we don't throw out the gold with the bath water. We're going to work on it and put it through a wash plant, and we're going to separate out what is the truth from what is the fiction. And I think that's the right way to go forwards with this. And that's certainly my approach, but you might disagree. So, this means starting at the beginning with the story of the Trojan War and working on from there, because that's where the story begins, with the Trojan War. And the Trojan myths will need to be analysed as best we can to see what truth may be concealed here. So I don't necessarily say that you can just take the Iliad and say, well, that's it. That's the truth. There it is. They built a big horse, and they did all that. There was Hector and there was Achilles, and Achilles was half god. I don't approach it like that, but I do think there's something in there that's very important. And I've said part of that was what Troy was, or the Troad was all about, was controlling the Dardanelles. That's why it's important. Only in this way will we get a picture of the true place the Brutus legend has in world history. So that's what we want. We want to know where the Brutus legend fits in history. Now then, we're going to have some fun. The story of the Trojan War begins with a heavenly marriage feast. Yes, that's how it begins. A malign goddess called Eris, which means discord in English, is not invited to the wedding. You can imagine that. It's a bit like, was it the Sleeping Beauty, wasn't it? And the old witch wasn't invited. Wasn't that the problem? It's the same kind of story. So Eris isn't invited to the wedding. So she's angry at the snub. And so she throws a golden apple into the gods' festivities. They all have partying, they're having an orgy, they're having fun, they're drinking, they're doing whatever at the big wedding feast. And she decides she's going to disrupt things. She gets a golden apple, and golden apples have a lot of meaning within Greek mythology, because it's to do with the golden apple of the Hesperides, and we won't go down to that, but they have a lot of meaning. And then she writes on it, to the fairest. So you write on the apple, there's all these girls dancing and having fun and the big wedding feast, and you throw an apple in among them like a grenade, and it lands there. Oh, what's that? Oh, it's a golden apple. Wow! Who's it for? And they pick it up and it says, for the fairest. And then they sort of start looking around, who does that mean? Huh? Who does that mean? They take it to Zeus, who's the father of the gods. And they say, look, Dad, we got this apple and it says who's for the fairest. Which of us is the fairest? He's not going to go there, is he? He's a sensible god. I almost said sensible man, but of course he's not a man, he's a god in the Greek mythology. So he's sort of said, yeah, I have to think about that. And then he decides that, well, if I'm going to piss off my daughters if I say which one I think is the fairest, so I'll get someone else to do it. So he decides, Zeus, father of the gods, decides that there should be a beauty contest between three prime candidates. And the goddesses are Hera, that's his wife. You don't insult your missus, do you? So, yeah, you go there, darling, take part in the beauty contest. You're gorgeous, you're my wonderful wife. You haven't aged at all. So he's a sensible man, or god. So she's put in. And then there's Athena, and Athena, Minerva. She's the tricky one. She's very intelligent. She's an absolute feminist. So he doesn't want to upset her. She's going to be trouble. She's come out of his head in the Greek myths. She's the goddess of intelligence and she carries a big spear. She can cause real damage and trouble. Ever virgin, she's not going to mess around. So yeah. Go. You can have a go as well, dear. Yeah. Of course, it doesn't matter you're a feminist. It doesn't matter that you don't like men. It doesn't matter at all, darling. You're just as beautiful. You go and take part in the contest as well. And then the third contestant, of course, is Aphrodite, Venus. And we all know what Venus is like, don't we? She's the goddess of love. She's the party girl. She's absolutely stonking gorgeous, Think Raquel Welch. Think of the most gorgeous women you ever see on television or on the movies or whatever. Liz Hurley or someone, Yeah, well, yeah, of course. Go on, So, but I'm not going to judge it. He's got someone else to do it. And the judge will be Paris, the younger son of King Priam of Troy. Now, Paris is known for telling the truth. He's got a lot of other faults, this boy, but he does tell the truth. He's not a liar. Even in situations of legal things, he's said things, he's been a star witness and told the truth. So he decides, we'll have Paris. And everyone agrees, Paris, he's a good choice. Yeah, he tells the truth. So Paris is going to be the one who's going to do the judging. Now, it would have been so much better if they had someone who was more of a diplomat. Yeah? If they had chosen someone like, Ulysses, someone who's sly and who would know damn well the best thing to do is to choose Hera, the mother. They're not going to argue with her if she wins, and she'll feel fine, she'll feel great, and the whole thing will go away, probably. But Paris is a young guy, He's full of hormones. He's at that lustful age, anything in a skirt, but especially pretty ones in a skirt. So he's going to be the judge. So Eris, of course, knows very well that however he chooses, such a contest is going to lead to disaster. Well, I think I might have got away with it if he had chosen Hera, but he didn't. One goddess will be happy, but the other two will be furious and seeking revenge. So what does he do? Yeah? Here's the judgment. The three goddesses disrobe and present themselves before Paris, and there you can see them. We got the three goddesses there. We got Hera on the left, and we got Athena on the right, delicately turning her back to us, only showing us her backside because she's a bit of a prude, is Athena. And then in the middle, letting it all hang out, is Venus, Aphrodite, with Cupid hanging on to her there. And it doesn't take a genius to work out, who he's going to choose. Esoterically, they represent the good but middle-aged wife, that's Hera. The ever-virgin feminist, which is Athena, and the stunningly gorgeous party girl, Aphrodite. And as I say, he's a young man. Each of the goddesses offer bribes to Paris if he will only choose them. Yeah, choose me, says Hera. I'll make you king of the world. I have it in my palm. I can do it. Minerva, or Athena, says to him, well, I'll make sure I'll give you total, huge intelligence. I'll make you the most learned person in the world. You'll eclipse everyone. You'll be so clever. And then Venus, or Aphrodite, says to him, I tell you what, I'll make the most beautiful woman in the world fall for you and share your bed. I can do that. I'm the one who decides who falls in love with who. I can do that for you. And he's a young man full of hormones. What is he going to do? Of course, he chooses her. And the other two, an absolute rage. They're going to get revenge for this. They'll take revenge on Paris. They'll take revenge on everything. They're going to punish them for what they do, or what he's done. And that's how things are going to progress. Well, anyway, the story continues. In another Greek myth, later, don't ask me how this one works. As I say, we can't take these things literally. In another Greek myth, Leda, the wife of Tyndareus, the king of Sparta, right? So Spartans, they're pretty Spartan in Sparta. But she's seduced by Zeus, the father of the gods. So Zeus himself has come along, and he's always got an eye for the ladies, Zeus in the Greek myths. And he sees her probably sunbathing or something, and he says, oh, I fancy that. But I'll have to be a bit cautious here. So he comes down to her in the form of a swan, a beautiful, lovely white swan, and she loves the swan and cuddles it. And of course, he takes advantage, and she becomes pregnant. Now, how you become pregnant by a swan, I don't know, but that's the Greek myth. And she gives birth to 4 children, 2 pairs of twins. And 2 of them are sired by Zeus and 2 by her husband. So the 2 that are sired by Zeus are semi-immortals, yeah? And they're demigods. And the other 2 are ordinary mortals, humans. So that's how we get Castor and Pollux. They're one pair, the Dioscuri. And Helen's one of the others. I forget who the other one counterpart with her is, but it doesn't matter. Helen is one of the demigods, and she's a daughter of Zeus. And she's stunningly gorgeous and beautiful. Most beautiful woman in the world. The woman who can launch 1,000 ships, as it says in Faust, I think. So that Leda gives birth to this gorgeous girl, Helen, and there she is. Helen grows up to be the most beautiful woman in the world. Well, this is a pre-Raphaelite picture, and I think this lady was the artist's mistress. So he has her as personifying Helen of Troy. I'm not sure that she would be the most beautiful woman in the world, but she's very nice. And and she marries Menelaus, the king of Sparta. And this is not incest, as there were two royal families in Sparta and two kings. So the Spartans had two royal families, so one king could go out to fight, when they're off on warfare, and the other one would be at home, making sure there's no insurrections or problems in the home base. They've probably taken it turns. They're a warrior caste, the Spartans. So two royal families, and she's married to one of them. And Paris goes to Sparta and is entertained by Menelaus in his house. So the king of Sparta is very nice to him. He goes there. Oh, hi. I'm here from Troy. Perhaps we can do some trade with Sparta. Oh, yes, come in. Yeah, haven't seen any Trojans for a long time. Come in. Yeah, have supper with us. Yeah, we'll find you a room somewhere. Yeah, and then Menelaus gets called away. There's some trouble he's got to go and sort out. So yeah, you make yourself at home, and I tell my servants to look after you. Well, then Aphrodite causes Helen to immediately fall in love with the very handsome Paris. So Paris is a very handsome young lad, and there's this gorgeous young wife of Menelaus, Helen, daughter of a god. And Paris himself, he's no trifle. He's a very good-looking young man, and horny as anything. So what's going to happen when her husband goes away? He's called away, and they immediately begin a passionate affair. So he starts looking after Menelaus' wife while he's away. Very naughty, very bad. Anyway, Menelaus is coming back. So they have to make a quick escape. And before Menelaus can stop them, Paris abducts Helen and takes her back to Troy. So they managed to just get away in time before the Spartans can stop them eloping. And she has few objections to leaving her husband, as she is besotted with the handsome Trojan. So Helen's all for it, take me back to Troy, darling. Yeah, we'll have a great time. Yeah, I'll divorce him and we'll get married. It'll be wonderful. Well, he is a Spartan. You might have to think about that. So Menelaus, he has a brother called Agamemnon, and he's king of Mycenae, and he's the high king of the Greeks. And he calls everyone into council. Look, everybody, all your kings, from the islands as well. People like Nestor and Ulysses, all of you, Ajax and Achilles, we've got to do something about it. We can't let these Trojans abuse us like this. We've got to get Helen back for my brother Menelaus. It can't stand. It's not on. So they agree, and they all get into their ships and they sail off for Troy. So he's accompanied by heroes like Achilles. Now Achilles is very important in the Iliad. He's the son of Thetis, who's a sea nymph. And she wants him to be immortal like she is. So she gets her father, Poseidon, who's Neptune, to bless him as long as he's put into the water. It's sort of baptism, I suppose. But she has to hold him by somewhere. She holds his heel and submerges the rest of him in the water so he can get this godliness from Neptune. And so he becomes this invincible warrior. You can't hurt him. You slash, you can try and stab him. It doesn't work. He's invincible. So he's come along, and Ajax is a great big burly Greek which carries a huge shield with 7 layers to it and a giant spear. Actually, there's 2 Ajaxes. Ajaxes, should I say, is big Ajax with his big shield and spear, and there's little Ajax, who's the smart one, but he's quite small. So it's like the one brother has got the half the share of the other one in terms of size and mass, but the other one's smart. And they all sail off to sea, and they go to fight the Trojans, or to get Helen back. And despite all pleading by the other Trojans say to Paris, look, for God's sake, what have you done? Send her back. We can't have this. This is going to cause chaos. And he said, no, I can't. I won't. A sulky teenager. No, I'm not going to do that. I love her. She loves me. I'm not going to return her to the Greeks. We have to defeat them. And his father, he's his father's darling. And he stands by his son and says, look, we're going to have to fight them. We can do this. We're Trojans. We can fight them. We can defeat them. Don't worry about the Greeks. My son gets what he wants. So they hold firm. So Paris won't give her up, and honour demands that they stand by him. So the war drags on for 10 long years. Yeah, the Greeks they bring their ships, they burn the ships, and they camp out on the beach there or nearby, and they're fighting this war. It goes on and on for 10 years, and periodically the Trojans will come out from the city and there'll be some fighting, and then they'll go back into their city and close the doors, and the Greeks will go back to their camp. And after all this, Achilles is fed up. He's sulking in his tent. This is what the Iliad's all about. And he lets his best friend go off to fight them. To keep the Greeks enthusiastic, they need to see Achilles among them, because they know he's immortal. He can't be killed. So Patroclus, his friend, puts on his armour and goes out there. And he's unfortunate enough to come across Hector, who's Paris's older brother. And Hector is another big, hefty guy and a bully to boot. And he kills Patroclus and drags his body round. And Achilles is absolutely furious that his best friend has been killed. And it's his fault, because he wouldn't go and do what he should have been doing. Because he was sulking in his tent. His friend put on his armour and he got himself killed. So he's going to take vengeance on Hector. And he goes out there and he calls Hector, and they agree to have a 1-to-1. And they fight, and he kills Hector. And then he ties him to the back of his chariot and drags him round the city. And won't give the body back. So that's an awful, awful thing, because Hector's the crown prince, the eldest son of Priam, the king of Troy. So then, as Achilles is sort of celebrating his victory, Paris spies him, and he takes his bow and arrow. And Paris is a very good shot, plus he's helped by Venus, Aphrodite. And he's got a poison-tipped arrow, and he fires it at Achilles, and it happens by chance to hit him right in the heel, the bit where the goddess had been holding him, Thetis. And of course that goes in, and Achilles is poisoned by this poison arrow, and he dies. Horror of horrors, he's not meant to die, he's supposed to be immortal. How can Achilles die, our great hero? So the Greeks then decide, well, we've had enough of this. Well, we tell them that anyway. We've got to do something. And Ulysses, the sly one, he comes up and he whispers in Agamemnon's ear. He says, look, we've been doing it your way for too long, right? We've been doing it the Spartan way, out there with weapons, swords, spears, everything. We got to trick them, yeah. We got to fool these guys, and they're not that smart, So instead, he says, well, let's pretend to go away, and they'll think we've gone, and then we'll come back. But what we'll do is we'll make a big horse, because the horse is very important to these Trojans. It's a symbol of one of their gods. And they won't quite know what to do about it, but we make a really, really big horse, and the Trojans will leave it there as a gift. And the Trojans will look at this horse, they'll say, well, you know, they've all gone now, we'll take the horse into the city and we'll celebrate, you know, we'll celebrate that we got rid of the Greeks and they've gone home. So they bring the horse into the city, and of course concealed inside the horse are armed men, you know, the squad of armed men, probably their best soldiers. And when the Trojans bring the horse in, and that night they're celebrating, they're having a party. Yeah, great, we won. And while they're partying, the guys inside the horse open the trapdoor and they climb out. And they open the gates and they call in the others. The others have come back. They pretend to sail away, but they've come back. And that the Greek army is able to get into the city. And of course, all hell breaks loose and they defeat the Trojans. Troy is sacked and put to the fire. It will no longer dominate the access to the Black Sea. Those Trojans who aren't dead are taken away to Greece as slaves. So there's a goodly number who are taken away. And Helen is returned to her husband. Well, yeah, that's going to be fun, isn't it, to explain that. Where have you been, darling, for the last 10 years? What have you been up to? How dare you? Yeah, she's going to have a great time, isn't she? Meanwhile, Agamemnon, who sacrificed his own daughter for a fair wind, goes home to Mycenae. This guy, his brother, he actually sacrificed his own daughter in the mythology to get a good wind to carry the boats across. He's now got to face the fury of her mother, his wife, and that starts a whole other chain of events. He's the fall of the house of Atreus, and the curse on the house of Atreus. That's a whole other thing. You get Greek plays all about that. So that's been sparked off also by the Trojan War. And the related Roman myth, there is a Roman myth relates to this, concerns Aeneas. Now I mentioned him before, and he's a prince of a different branch of the royal family. You've got the branch that comes down to King Priam and his son Hector and Paris and then his daughters. And you've got a different branch that comes down and goes to Aeneas. And Aeneas himself is, again, it's a mythology. He's a son of Venus himself. Venus has had a little fling with his dad, who was a shepherd, I think, on Mount Ida, which is in Troy, or Troad. And as a result, Aeneas was born, and then he's been raised as a prince. So he's actually Venusian, you could say, himself. And he's all right with the Greeks. They understand his nobility. He's not a Trojan. He's come in out of loyalty and honour. He had to associate himself with them, but he's not really one of them. He is one of them, but from a different branch. So he's allowed to leave, and he leaves carrying his father, who had had the affair with Venus or Aphrodite. He carries him on his shoulders because the old father can't walk, and he takes his little son with him. Unfortunately, his wife, Creusa, she gets killed in the sacking of Troy, so she doesn't go with them. And he leaves with a bunch of ships and his men, and they go off to seek their adventures elsewhere. And he has all sorts of journeys. Virgil wrote a book called the Aeneid, all about him and his trips, and how he went to places like Carthage. He goes to Carthage, and the Queen of Carthage falls in love with him, Dido. And of course, he's the son of Venus. He's going to be very good looking, isn't he? And she falls in love with him, but after they've been together for a while, he says, I'm off. And says, oh, don't go, don't go. Ah. But he does go, and she commits suicide. So he has various adventures on the way, a bit like Odysseus in the Odyssey. And eventually he turns up in Italy. But you can see here the lineage leading down to Aeneas from Tros. Tros is the grandson of Dardanus, who founds the city of Dardania. Tros is his grandson, and he has children. Ilus founds Ilion, which is the city of Troy. But Azarachus is a brother of Ilus, and he has a son called Capys, and his son, Anchises, has the affair with Aphrodite, or the Venus, and out of that is born Aeneas. So we can see there the family tree of Aeneas. And Aeneas is actually the same generation, if you count the generations, as the children of Priam. So Hector and Paris and the others there. So after many adventures, Aeneas and Ascanius, his son, arrive in Italy. There they are welcomed by Latinus, the king of Latium. Yeah, so Latium, Lazzo now, I think, in Italy. That's where they go to. And Aeneas meets and eventually marries the king's daughter Lavinia. So you can imagine, she's going to fall in love with him as well on first sight, just like Dido did, and probably others before. And together they found the city of Lavinium, or Alba Longa, which will later result in the founding of Rome by their descendants, Romulus and his brother Remus. So Rome had two foundation legends. One is founding by Aeneas, but the other one is Romulus and Remus, and you know about them, how they were left exposed as babies, and they were suckled by a wolf and survived, and then they grew up. And eventually they founded the city of Rome, and then Romulus murdered his brother, so it's called Rome. It's not called Rheims. I don't know. But anyway, that's one creation or foundation myth for Rome. The other is that Aeneas founded it, but they changed it a bit to it's the city of Lavinium or Alba Longa before the foundation of Rome. Rome's going to come out of that. So Virgil kind of put the two myths together. So the traditional date for the founding of Rome is 753 BC, and that's a very important date because it means that Rome's founded in the middle of the 8th century. How could that be? Well, now, a slight digression here. We have this problem with dates, particularly around this period, and it's been made worse by archaeologists. And here is a famous archaeologist, Professor Colin Renfrew. I think he's still alive, actually. Anyway, he wrote in the foreword to this book, Ages of Darkness, and you should really read this for this period. I'll come back to that in a minute. So he wrote, "History needs dates. Chronology is the backbone of archaeology as well as of history. For without a time framework of events, no clear picture of what happened in the past, no knowledge of which significant development came first." So you need to know, he's saying, you need to know, have a skeleton of history where you can slot things in. You need to know that the Anglo-Saxons came after the Romans, not before them, for example. If you get the dates wrong, that can screw everything. you think you've got it right for whatever reason, but you've actually got it wrong, really does screw up everything. And that was something that Alan Wilson was really onto when I talked to him. And he wrote a number of books trying to put that right, what he believed was the correct version of history. I don't know that he was always correct, but he was certainly working on that line, trying to recreate or recorrect the history of ancient Britain in the light of tradition rather than of modern archaeology, which doesn't know a thing often. So that's where we are with that. So, according to mainstream archaeology and also the legends of the Greeks, the Trojan War took place during the Mycenaean period of Greek history, which is currently dated around 1100 BC. That's, you look in the history books, that's sort of what they tell you. The Greeks put it back a bit further, sort of 1200, 1250 BC. And this is too early to be credible for the burnt layer of Troy, and we'll come back to the burnt layer of Troy shortly. Mycenaean civilization must have been simply the earlier stage of the later Greek civilization of the city-states, such as Athens and Sparta, which were also involved in the Trojan War. So, Trojan War, then Athens and Sparta take part in it. So Mycenae is where Agamemnon was king. So it must have been that we call it the Mycenaean civilization, the Greeks from that period. But Athens and other places were also around at that time. There must have been. And this is where the problem with dates starts. According to Greek mythology, the siege of Troy took place around 1250 BC. If this is true, then Mycenae and the other Greek city-states must have been contemporaneous. Yeah? Well, makes sense, doesn't it? But this does not fit at all with the founding of Rome in 753 BC, as Romulus and Remus are only a few generations after Aeneas. So you can't stretch it that far and also keep your foundation of Rome intact along with its mythology. We're starting to get everything, one thing pulling in that direction, the other pulling in that direction. What's going on here? To explain this, archaeologists have invented a so-called Bronze Age Dark Age that lasted some 400 years. I find this totally extraordinary, I have to say. They believe there was a collapse of the Mycenaean civilization when Greece went to sleep for 400 years or more. Yeah? So they've been, culturally developing. They're fighting wars, they've got ships, they've got all stuff, they're building cities, they're doing all the stuff that you would expect. And then suddenly, nothing happens. There's no new layers being formed for 400 years. During this time, there's no pottery, no art, nothing to show they're still there. So they've sort of vanished. They've all gone to sleep for 400 years. And then 400 years later, after this long winter, Greece suddenly comes back to life with new cities, but still speaking and writing in Greek. Homer writes his stories of the Trojan War and its aftermath from long ago. This happened 400 years ago, but I'm writing my story now, just a generation or two before the really classic period of Athens, when it's at its peak. The Greeks wear the same kind of clothing, use the same weapons, and plait their hair in the same way. And a picture here I've got from this book, Centuries of Darkness, and as I say, this is the theme of this book. And Peter James is to be congratulated for this. It's a marvellous book that Colin Renfrew wrote, and showing how this whole Centuries of Darkness thing has screwed up history in the Middle East particularly, and how they even faked things like carbon dating. That instead of they take the carbon dates, they don't like the results. They say, well, we need to add a bit more on to make it older. There must be something wrong with the carbon. We'll add that on. But they only do that for this sort of Aegean area and Egypt. Outside of that, in Northern Europe, they take the carbon dates exactly as they are. So you have this divide between. He's actually got a diagram of it. I'll show you. I'll put it in here for you. All this, of course, is nonsense. But the archaeologists have to think this way for their dates to fit with what they believe to be the dates for pottery from Egypt. Now, you think, what? What? We haven't even mentioned Egypt here. We've been talking about Greece, and we've been talking about Turkey, and we've been talking a bit about Italy, but Egypt? What's that got to do with anything? Well, our problem with dating artifacts from Troy really has nothing to do with either Greece or Troy. It originates with the work of William Flinders Petrie in Egypt. Now, I'm a big fan of William Flinders Petrie on the whole, and it's not his fault really, because we didn't know enough at the time when he was doing his major work, which was the early part of the 20th century. But he pioneered the idea of being able to date things from pottery. But the trouble is that he was using Manetho, and Manetho was writing a long time after all the events he's talking about. He's only got fragmentary records. He's working in the library in Alexandria, and so he's got a lot of stuff there to work with. But what he doesn't seem to have taken into account, and people are realizing now more, is that in these dynasty lists, that there were overlapping dynasties. You might have one dynasty ruling in one part of Egypt and another dynasty in a different part. So they're really contemporaneous, but he's made them sequential. So that increases your timeline and pushes things back. And that's been a major problem. A lot of Egyptologists don't want to address that problem. There are people who have been doing work on that. David Roll comes to mind as he's done some fantastic work, particularly around the period of the Exodus and when that might have happened, and seeing that this Dark Age, Bronze Age, Bronze Age, Dark Age is nonsense. So it's a point of debate and tension, not just within Egyptology, but within the greater sphere, because those dates from Egyptology affect the dates of places that have similar kind of pottery to the kind of pottery they have in Egypt, and it's a problem. More recent work indicates that Manetho's king lists, though good in the main, don't tell the whole story. We now know his dynasties were not always consecutive. There could at times be different dynasties ruling in different parts of Egypt at the same time. Making them consecutive has the effect of stretching the timeline. This is the cause of the so-called Bronze Age, Dark Age. So instead of analysing dates, I'm going to suggest that the true date for the destruction of Troy was around 850 BC. That's what I think. In other words, some 100 years before the founding of Rome. That makes sense to me, and you'll see why as we press on here. Now, Rome lies just a little to the south of the southern border of Etruria. Etruria is the part of Italy we now call Tuscany. I think it's between the Po and the Tiber rivers. And you have lots of hilltop cities. My wife and I went to one a few years ago called Cortona, which was a lovely, gorgeous place on a hilltop, a lovely old city. But it also had other things, a lot of Etruscan Thus, Latium is just to the south of Etruria. This is interesting as Etruria, which was later conquered by Rome, shows clear indication of having been founded by migrants from Anatolia. Could this migration be the reality of the story of Aeneas? We got people coming from that area, settling in Italy. Could that be what the story is about? Well, clearly the Trojan War was an episode in the collision between the expanding Greek world, which built cities on the coast of Ionia in Anatolia, and the world of the Oriental powers, notably Lydia, Phrygia, and the earlier city-states of the Anatolian Aegean. These could have included Troy. It is in this context that we have to see the Trojan War. So we have the Greeks founding cities on the coast of Anatolia, what we now call Turkey. They found 12 major cities, most of them on the mainland, a couple on islands. They call them the Dodecapolis. Dodeca means 12. Polis means city. So it's the 12 cities. They form what's called the Ionian League of those cities. Why Ionia? Well, there's also an Ionian Sea on the other side of Greece, between Greece and Italy. The heel of Italy and part of Greece. That's called the Ionian Sea. And there are islands there. So that's the second Ionia. So what is the truth of the Trojan War and the Aeneas migration to Italy? In the 18th and 19th centuries, the Trojan War was generally regarded as a myth without substance. Then, in the 1870s, Heinrich Schliemann, who was a German businessman turned amateur archaeologist, went searching for it. So someone actually had the guts to, he's made some bit of money as a businessman. He had the guts to say, well, I don't agree that there was no Troy, it's just a myth. I want to find it. I'm going to go and look for it. So he does. And he began excavations at a promising site in Turkey called Hisarlik. That was in Turkish, Hisarlik. It was in roughly the right place where Troy would need to be if there was any truth to the legends. And between 1872 to 3, he found a whole series of layers to this site representing a succession of cities. At least one of these had been burnt to the ground in antiquity. So is this Troy? He's found the city that's been burnt to the ground. And we know from the legends of the Trojan War, the Greeks set fire to Troy, they burnt it to the ground. All looking very promising. He also found some beautiful jewellery of the period, which his wife Sophia modelled for photographs. So they found all sorts of the treasures of Priam, he called them, the King Priam of Troy. And his wife, Sophia, she's quite a looker, wasn't she, in her day? I can see why she might want to put on these lovely... I can see why he would want a picture of his wife wearing this stuff. But anyway, most of the treasures were taken back to Germany by Schliemann. He smuggled them out, apparently. He wasn't meant to do that, from the Ottoman Empire back to Germany. But he later gave some back to Turkey, or the Ottoman Empire, so that he could carry on with his digging. Today, the bulk of it, that's the treasures that he found, are in the Pushkin Museum in Moscow, with some in St. Petersburg. It was all looted from Berlin by the Russians during World War II, or at the end of it. It was only after the fall of the Soviet Empire in 1991 that they revealed the truth. Anyway, a problem remains with the dating of the site of Troy, especially its burnt layers. And you can see with this jewellery, it was a rich place, just like it says in the books. And you can imagine the Greeks looted a lot when they came, so this lot must have been hidden well if they didn't get it. Aeneas is said to have been a son of the goddess Venus, I said that earlier, by Anchises, and he founded by Anchises. He founded Lavinium, which would become Rome. He did that with his second wife, Lavinia, who was daughter of the king of Latium. So we have a little lineage here. We have Anchises and Venus, the goddess, she gives birth to Aeneas, who marries Creusa, Trojan first wife. She has a son, Ascanius, also sometimes called Iulus. He has a son called Silvius. The Silvius has a son called Brutus. So Brutus is going to be the one that we're going to be looking at in a subsequent program. His son Ascanius came with him from Troy and was by his first wife Creusa, and Brutus was the grandson of Ascanius. So putting all this together, Aeneas escaped from burning Troy with his father and his son. He spent 10 years wandering before he reached Italy. Where would he go? The obvious place to seek sanctuary would be with people who spoke the same language, shared the same customs, had the same gods, and perhaps used the same script for writing. And that place was Etruria. Must have been, mustn't it? And the politically correct version of the history of Etruria is that it evolved locally with a little cultural diffusion from Greece, Egypt, and Asia. This diffusion of ideas is supposed to have come about via peaceful trade. They always say this, it's just peaceful trade, There was no Anglo-Saxon invasion of England. It's just a few guys came over and they peacefully traded and mixed in with the Britons, and the Britons started speaking English, and it was all lovey and it's all flowers. No, it wasn't. It was invasion. However, the traditional version of history is quite different. Herodotus tells us of a mass migration to Italy from Lydia. This was a wealthy kingdom in the northwest of Anatolia, and they brought their culture with them. So what version of history is true? And this is actually an Etruscan bronze statue, and it's in the British Museum. I was there last week, and it's actually on the top of a long curly thing, which was used for scraping people in the bathhouse. So you want to be beautiful, you want to be lovely. You go and have a sweat bath, in the classical style. You don't just get into hot water and wash yourself. You sweat it all out and then you scrape it off with this thing. Well, who do you think that's meant to represent? I think it represents Venus. She's nearly always shown naked. And the whole process of going to the bathhouse and having the beauty treatments is you want to be beautiful. It probably was a woman's implement, and they want to be beautiful. They want the blessings of the goddess Venus. Of course you do. Why wouldn't you? They want to look like her, or have her blessing anyway. So, which version of history is true? Well, here's a little map I've got, and you can see where Lydia is. I've arrowed it there. And you can see where Phrygia is. These are two very important kingdoms in Anatolia. And you can see there are two other kingdoms, Lycia and Caria, further south. And it's mostly on their coastline that the Greeks started founding their 12 cities. And you see in the top left-hand corner the Troad. And that's where Troy was, guarding the Dardanelles. So it's all there. Latin, the language of Rome, is completely different from Greek. The Roman alphabet, in which Latin was written, is also different from the Greek alphabet. For where does it come from? The answer seems to be the Etruscan alphabet. And this is an Etruscan I'm not sure what it is. Is it a seal? Is it something else? It was in the British Museum. I was in the Etruscan galleries last week. So I took a picture of it. And there you can see it. And that is authentic Etruscan writing that you've got there. And it's not Greek. So what is it? Turn it round, I took a mirror image of it. And you can almost read that, can't you? Cul manum e treonsa. Treonsa sounds like 3 ounces to me, treonsa. Was this intended to be a standard weight? Oh, that's weird, isn't it? It also sounds quite Latinish. So, I don't know. But the important thing is they're using these letters, which with a little bit of manipulation, very quickly could become the Latin alphabet. The Etruscan script is similar to Pelasgian. The Pelasgians is a group title for the peoples of Western Anatolia. So I showed you all those different little kingdoms. We would call all of them Pelasgian. And they had the Pelasgian alphabet. And some people say that actually came originally from Phoenicia. I don't know the truth on that, but they were using that alphabet. It's not the same as the Greek alphabet. So just a little to the east of Troy is the island of Lemnos, and you can see Lemnos there, that big island. I've written in red letters above it, Lemnos. In Greek mythology, it was the home of Hephaestus, which is the Greek name for falcon, the husband of Aphrodite, Venus. So there's very funny stories about Venus and her ugly husband, Vulcan. And she was always cheating on him. He's cheating with the god Mars. So anyway, he's linked with Venus. And you can see here, I've also marked there on this map Troy. You can see it's not that far from Lemnos. You just sail out there. And you can also see I've marked Ida, and that's where Venus or Aphrodite is supposed to have had her affair with the father of Aeneas on Mount Ida. So that's what links her directly. She's married to Vulcan on Lemnos, so she would have spent time there. So it puts her right there. She's obviously the goddess of this area. Here on Lemnos, a stela was found with one of the longest texts yet discovered in the Pelasgian script. And Lemnos was a Trojan island, so it follows that this script was once used by the Trojans too. And they're not going to have a different script from the Lydians on one side and the Lemnos people on the other, and the Phrygians a little further south. They're going to all use the same script because they're very much connected, these different kingdoms, with one another. And it's doubly interesting when it is realised that the script on the Lemnos stela is very similar to that used by the Etruscans. Now, I haven't got very many letters on that little thing I photographed, but there's lots of other Etruscan scripts I've seen, and they are very similar, while both scripts are very different from Greek. Now, Etruria appears very suddenly in the mid-8th century. Its first cities were on the coast, but within a few decades it dominated the Italian peninsula. The culture of Etruria was far in advance of what went before. The name Etruria sounds like Etruria, meaning from Troy. Etruria, Troy. Is this a further clue to its origins? Well, that's something to think about, isn't it? The Etruscans built elaborate chambered tombs. These are quite unlike anything that went before them in Italy. They filled them with grave goods, most of which were long ago looted, but some survived long enough to be taken to museums. That some weren't looted. The Etruscans were not indigenous to Italy. They came originally from Asia Minor, what is now Turkey. This explains why high-status Etruscan tombs are very similar to those in Phrygia and Lydia. These were two rival kingdoms in Western Asia Minor close to the Troad. The most famous king of Phrygia was Midas. He was known to have reigned between about 740 to 700 BC. You've heard of King Midas. Everything he touched would turn to gold. And unfortunately his daughter came running in and she touched him and she was turned into gold. So the king, this blessing this gift the gods had given him, that whatever he would touch would turn to gold, became a curse because his own daughter was turned into gold. It broke his heart. And this is the tomb of King Midas. And I've actually been there back in the 1980s, actually, and had a good look round and saw the stuff that they had found in that tomb. There's a museum there that you can have a look at Gordian. Inscriptions using the same Pelasgian script have been found at Gordian. You can see them here. This was the capital of Phrygia, where the tomb of King Midas is. Phrygia is just to the east of the Troad. So there you have it. There's Phrygia. While Herodotus' story of the Lydians casting lots, he tells a story that Lydia was getting overpopulated, and so they decided that half the population needed to go, needed to emigrate. And they cast lots for who should go and who should stay. So half of them got in the boats, broken-hearted, everyone weeping and wailing, and they went off to sea. They went westwards. Where did they go? Etruria. It's a good possibility, isn't it? They were going to Italy, beyond Greece. They wouldn't want to go to Greece. That's the problem area. But they go on to Italy and found the colonies there in Etruria. The Etruscans built fortified cities on hilltops. Yeah, you do that when you're an invader. You build castles, don't you? You don't just hope that everything's going to be just fine. You conquer the land, you take it, and then you build fortresses. So you probably haven't got the numbers that the people you're going to control have, but by building fortifications, you can defend yourself, until you've got time to put your armour on and go out and swipe them. So the Etruscans built fortified cities on hilltops and had a strong navy to defend trade. They were a trading seaborne nation. Yet they were not Greeks, and they were not Egyptians. They came from Western Anatolia. So Rome was not a city founded by Greeks, and we see this in the names of the gods. So here's the Greek names. Greek name, Zeus. Roman name, Jupiter, or also called Jove. We'll be talking more about him in the next program. Hera, Juno. Poseidon, Neptunus. Hades, Pluto. Kronos, Saturnus. Ares, Mars. Aphrodite, Venus. Hermes, Mercurius. Selene, Diana. Helios, Sol. So completely different names. It's not just adaptations from the Greek. They try to find parallelisms between their gods and the Greek gods. But I don't think these are always correct. And I'll be saying more about that in the next program. There seem to be two possible scenarios that could explain the migration evidence we see in Etruria. Firstly, there could have been a migration from either Lydia or Phrygia or both prior to the war between the Greeks and Trojans. Or secondly, the migration to Etruria was caused by the Trojan War, as remembered as Aeneas going west. To my mind, the former scenario seems to fit the history better. Aeneas knew there was already a healthy colony of Pelasgians in Italy. He went there to seek sanctuary and start a new life. Thus, this part of the myth holds up very well. Meanwhile, the Greeks pressed on with founding new colonies on the coast of Anatolia. They called this region Ionia after the islands and sea that separated Greece itself from eastern Italy. So there you can see, I've put a little map here. You can see where Ionia is. You can see where Lydia is there. Troia. And you can see the Ionian Sea on the other side of Greece. So it all begins to make sense when you see the connections between what's going on. The Greeks wanting to take over in Turkey. And there's still a lot of friction between the Greeks and Turks, isn't there? Always has been throughout history. It's a bit like England and France, There's been friction throughout history. Sometimes they work all right together, but other times they're treading on each other's toes. And it doesn't matter who's actually living in those particular countries, whether they're Lydians or Turks or whatever, there's going to be friction because of the geography and because of the rivalry caused by that geography. So the Dodecapolis, 12 cities of the Greeks, they were on the coast of Asia Minor. And they're all marked on this map I found with red dots. And Miletus at the bottom, they call it Miletar there, well, it should be Miletus in my language. Anyway, the 12 cities, they started a big rebellion against Persia, and when the Persians took over and swept in, and that caused the invasion of Greece by Persia, which ultimately led to the Battle of Marathon, the Battle of Salamis, and ultimately Alexander the Great invading and taking over the entire Persian Empire. So these things do have consequences, but sometimes a long way down the line. So the story of Brutus and his similar migration, this time from what is now Albania to Britain. Albania, yeah, I call it Albania. They call it Epirus in the ancient texts, but Epirus is actually what we would now call Albania, opposite Corfu. To Britain will be subject of the next part of this double program. So there you have it, my friends, and as I see it, the Aeneas story does hold water. It is really about the migration of people going from what we now call Turkey to Italy, starting a new civilization there, rather like us Brits going to America and starting the colonies there that later evolved, became far more powerful than we are, became the USA. The USA is now the most powerful nation that's ever been. Well, similarly with these people who came from Anatolia, at the time they were weaker. Weaker than the Greeks, and certainly weaker than the Persians who were pressing in on them. They went to Italy, and ultimately that led to the foundation of Rome, the most powerful of all of the classical empires. So that's another story, but in the next episode we're going to talk about Brutus, the great-grandson of Aeneas, and how he led a group of Trojans to come to Britain and start something else there. So thank you very much for your time. I hope you enjoyed it, and please be with me next time.